We're going to move forward. I have some questions that we're going to present. I think they've appointed a kind of a lead for each question, and then we're going to open it up and let everybody answer. But I have told them I will have to cut you off at some point because they do say they tend to get a little wordy and like to comment. So hopefully we'll get some good comments. So the first question, you all have spent some time in the region, and one of the questions that we had was, what's the best way for Lincoln and our regional communities to get the attention of companies that are considering new projects?
Hi, I'm Dennis Donovan, Wadley Donovan Gottschalk Consulting, based out of New Jersey, work around the country, and have done a lot of work in Nebraska, and also proud to say a UNO graduate. The best way to get our attention, number one, is to create an excitement and a buzz, to be doing something that is unique, that is compelling, that gets national attention, because that influences the thought of our clients and hence influences us. So that is number one, doing something, what I call the cool factor, something that distinguishes you in the marketplace. In terms of direct outreach to site selection consultants, real estate brokers, and so forth, which represent about 40 to 50% of the market in corporate location activity, I think that intelligent, periodic newsletters are effective, and they need to be very succinct and only include things that are really important to us, such as announcements of new facilities and expansions, entrepreneurship activities, and so forth. Really critical. If there is something in between a quarterly newsletter, a news flash is important. If there is a following on Twitter, a Twitter tweet is also a good idea. And then we'd like to see visitations. We'd like to see you maybe once a year coming up to our offices and telling us what's going on in the region. Then I think certainly in the trade shows that we go to, our trade industry such as Cornet is very important to be there and to be a major player. And then also to have a strong, well-funded marketing campaign that gets you recognition in the marketplace so we can keep awareness. But I think that direct e-based newsletter is important. And I got to tell you, I'd like to hear a telephone call once in a while just saying, hey, this is what's going on in the community. Nobody uses the phone anymore, and very few people use snail mail. I mean, if I get a handwritten postcard from somebody, I'm going to read that. I may dump the email, but I'll read the handwritten postcard.
Thanks, Dennis. And Dennis does like to brag that he's from Nebraska when we see him at trade shows, and I'm sure you can hear his Nebraska accent when he speaks. Anybody else have any comments on the question in terms of how we can work better to attract the attention of site selectors and businesses?
The common thread that I took from a lot of Dennis's comments is that a personal touch is important, whether it's through a handwritten note or a phone call or a visit. We, as I imagine all of you, are inundated with emails. The first thing I do each morning when I turn on my email is delete all the ones I'm not going to read. Being here just will increase the chances that I will read the emails that I get from Pat or from the other people involved in economic development, because now we do have a bit of a personal relationship. So I think that's a plus, and I'd echo Dennis's comments about the importance of visits if you have the opportunity.
Michelle, real quick, you actually did looked at Lincoln at one point for a project. What were some of the reasons why that came to the forefront in that particular instance?
I'm laughing at Pat because it was a funny project, but in that particular case, the client had come to us with an interest in Lincoln based on buzz that they had heard. It was a food industry client, so they had through their connections been sort of in tune with food industry happenings, and because of that I think we're attracted to the Lincoln area. But I was going to add on to Dennis and Jerry's comments. Totally agree with what was said, but in addition to that, sort of the next step is to be responsive when you get inquiries and get questions from companies and from site selectors. You know, it ends up being kind of a small world out there, and negative experiences echo louder than positive ones, unfortunately. So, you know, the more positive interaction you have with an area, the more it resonates in your mind of what a great place that is and wow, I'd like to work with those people. And I think probably all of us here probably will leave with that feeling and, you know, hoping that we can bring a project back here.
Great. Any
I'd like
others?
to say having a football team that wins the national championship really gets you on the list.
Having a football team with black shirts would be helpful.
We'll plan on
It's a
that next year.
myth of the past.
Yeah. Any others before we move on? Great. The next subject we're going to talk about a little bit is incentives. And I always find this to be an interesting subject because as economic development professionals, we spend months and months and months getting beat up for more incentives. And then when the companies announce, they say, well, incentives weren't a big piece of this. And unfortunately, we know that's not the case. Two recent projects that have gained some publicity. One was the Electrolux project in Memphis that received close to $200 million. And basically, you handed them a brand new manufacturing plant and said, here you go. And then we read recently the one in Baton Rouge that gave IBM a brand new office for 15 years to operate. So obviously, incentives are becoming increasingly important, and there's a growing incentive war, I think, particularly in the southern states, but even in places like New York that are spending enormous amounts of money now on projects. So what are some creative ways that communities and states that don't have as large of a tax base or as large of a fund been able to compete creatively?
Well, incentives obviously are important as a final decision maker, and in site selection, there's no number two. There's only one winner and no second place. So the incentives are often used as a way of differentiating between the top 2 or 3 locations. That's why you'll see, you'll come into second place and then somebody will top that with another incentive and then they'll end up going there, because at that point, the locations are relatively equal from an operating condition and operating cost standpoint. So incentives are more of a deal closing mechanism than anything else. I don't like to see communities lead with incentives. I think incentives are, sort of icing on the cake, but the most important thing you can do as a community is make sure you have a organization that provides a high level of service to companies and helping companies get to an area, become successful in an area, and make sure that they're going to be able to get the labor force trained with a good educational system. Those things are much more important than incentives. I wouldn't get distracted by these 1 and 2 kind of deals that certain companies will locate because of incentives. I like to call those beauty contests. I don't know if they're necessarily the best decision for a company. Picking a location based on incentives is like picking a bank because they give you a toaster. Those incentives will be gone long before that company leaves the area. So it's most important to select a location that's good for that company in the long run, and the incentives are simply a way to close the gap between the 1 and 2.
So, hi, I'm Will Hearn with Site Dynamics in Atlanta. I would say, just to echo Jim's comments, I believe incentives aren't going to always drive it. They're great deal closers when you've identified a location where all the other operational aspects make sense. I think the question is very valid. There has been a blossoming of deal closing funds around the country. They're a reality. The expectation on incentives is a reality among our clients. They understand that they exist. It's a part of our process we have to ask for. And depending on what types of incentive programs are there, they can make a difference. I've had projects where I've screened states out based on availability of incentives, and then I've had other projects where the negotiation process and the paperwork was so onerous that they just didn't have time to deal with it, and speed to market really was the more critical factor. So I think, if I'm on the economic development side looking at how to come to some sort of public policy on incentives, I think I would be benchmarking against my peers, which you all seem to be doing a very good job of, and making sure I had the right kind of tax credits in place that reward performance. It's pay as you go. It's solid sorts of clawback policies. And, based on what I saw in your state program, you have, the ability to monetize these tax credits across tax classes. And I think that, to me, is a best in class. I think, rewarding the wage credits that you do here, the percentage of the payroll, I think is a smart way to do it and to monetize that. There are other states that do it, but just based on a baseline incentive policy, I think that's a very strong platform to work from. And the other thing you have going for you is your unemployment rate here is so low. You know, you don't have to, you know, you can sort of say pick and choose and sort of figure out where you want to put your, you know, put your public dollars to support incentives. And while I haven't seen the Innovation Campus yet, I'm looking forward to being there today and making those types of strategic investments in yourself, I think can go a long way to, you know, create a situation where you're not competing on incentives. And I think, you know, I think that's where you are.
Michelle?
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Will, because we actually talked about that at lunch yesterday. The idea of, you know, this area has the luxury of having a low unemployment rate. So you actually have the opportunity to really target, okay, what industries do we want here? You know, where areas do we want to grow in? And create some targeted incentive programs to attract those things. And to Will's point, you know, incentives are a reality, you know, and it's a philosophy of the Guild especially that incentives never drive a decision. We're all believers in the full picture of site selection decision making, which involves all the operational factors that are important for an operation. But incentives do come into play, and particularly in the end in the deal closing. So having the ability to be flexible in what that particular project needs and being able to offer that up to close that deal is important.
Real quick, because it's, as a follow-up to that, Nebraska and Lincoln generally have chosen to make incentives statutory so that if one person's eligible, typically any person that's doing a similar type of project is eligible, and we've done that because of fairness issues and other things. Are you seeing a trend more towards more discretionary and targeted, and has that been more effective in your opinion?
Yeah, and I think Will alluded to it as well, this idea of these deal closing funds, which are calling it, those are discretionary dollars, usually at the state level, that you know, the government has the freedom to sort of apply those on projects that, again, are important for the state, that are fitting those targeted industries, and that meet those thresholds that they want to attract. So they're not just applying it to anything.
Any other comments on incentives before we move on?
Just one thing, Jason. In Nebraska, I'll just get to the point. Corporate income tax rate needs to be reduced. Personal income tax rate needs to be reduced. The investment tax credit that now is a credit needs to be refundable. And I believe for manufacturers in the state of Nebraska, they are going to succeed by innovation and technology. So there needs to be, American manufacturers are competitive now because of innovation and investment in technology to reduce labor content. And I believe that refundable investment tax credits for business expansion, even if there are no jobs created in manufacturing, is critical, because that's the sea change that's occurring in American manufacturing to make us competitive globally.
And that's why we all love Dennis. He's just to the point. So, Jerry, did you have?
Well, first of all, let me apologize. I should have introduced myself. I'm Jerry Szatan. I'm a consultant based in Chicago. And now that Dennis has gotten applause, I wish I hadn't raised my hand. I'm not sure what to do next. But I want to comment that one thing that I like about the state's incentive programs is the program now known as Nebraska Advantage was introduced several years ago, I believe, under another name. And I think one strength of that is that it recognizes different types of facility investments. On the one hand, there are incentive programs for companies that may hire a lot of people and make relatively low capital investments, but there are also criteria for companies that are on the other side, that have high capital investment but may employ relatively few number of people. And as I'm sure you all recognize, that in manufacturing, we're making more and more product with fewer and fewer people. So being able to reward companies at both ends of the spectrum, I think, is a strength.
Great.
And one last thing, 100% tax holiday for any company in an accelerator or an incubator. You want to get distinction as a place of entrepreneurship, that would do it.
Great, thanks. Will mentioned you all are going to be visiting with Dan and Innovation Campus later today, and obviously we're making a lot of investments in innovation and university-based economic development. Where have you seen communities or states that have developed strong higher education and research-based programming, and are there good examples of collaboration between higher education and economic development?
So, this is a great question, and it's going to deserve more than a minute answer. And I would say that Dennis is right. Something just came out that there is a state that is doing tax holidays for companies in incubation. There is something out there. There is movement. I think this whole higher education aspect is hugely important. It's one that's very near and dear to my heart, and I believe the universities haven't always been the easiest partners to come to the table. And I think it really does take leadership at the highest levels to sort of create the types of value-added partnerships. But many universities have the teaching, the research, and public service extension mission. And I was fortunate to be able to spend the night in Nebraska City last night and visited the outreach center there that they have. So you obviously have some very good things going on in this state, things that can be built upon and enhanced and leveraged. And it's always important to calibrate with what you're doing against other areas. And as I travel around and visit, these extension centers and outreach centers, I always feel like there's more they can be doing. And one of the important aspects is they need your help. It needs to be programmatic, but led by the private sector and led by need. And one of the really nice things, about the Innovation Campus, and I've recently worked on a project for another major Tier 1 research university campus for a $100 million R&D facility for GE. And I've had clients within the past 2 years where all 6 of our finalist locations were in university-affiliated research parks. And I've done projects for electronic arts that cited in research campuses, and for some semiconductor firms so I personally think there is huge value in this whole generating a geographic cluster for technology-led economic development that has all of your partners involved. And obviously this is a much larger conversation. There are structure and governance issues and how you want to reward that kind of behavior. And I haven't really had the opportunity to see the campus yet, so I'm really looking forward to it. It's one of the reasons I came out here. Because I think there is a huge value proposition for these types of locations within technology communities, and it's going to be a differentiator going forward for the next 20 to 25 years. And it's our joint challenge nationally to figure out how best to do it. And it's going to be done in tandem. It's going to be led by the private sector. The universities are going to have to be part of it. It's not just tech transfer. It's not just educating the next workforce, so that's a piece of it. But we have to think about generating that geographic cluster, that technology-led piece. And the last comment I'll say about it, and I know the others will have comments as well, is that you can't be everything to all people in this market space. And so a good national example that I like to look at is the International Center for Automotive Research at Clemson University, where I think they've really chosen to go deep into a single technology with a private sector-led approach that offers companies a lot of value. Now, I'm not saying that's a perfect model, because I don't think it is. I think they have their challenges. You look at UCSF out in Mission Bay out in San Francisco, you would think recruiting biotech to San Francisco would be kind of an easy proposition, but it's not. They have huge problems out there in doing it. So one of the fun things about these projects is they're very complicated, and one of the great things about these types of initiatives is that they're very much needed.
Any other comments on the higher education?
I'd certainly agree with Will, and I think the example he brought up of iCard Clemson is a great one. He didn't mention the private sector, but the company was BMW, and BMW had been assembling cars in the U.S. for a number of years, and they wanted to move up the value chain internally to where they'd be designing cars and doing research. And to do that, they wanted to enhance the supply of engineers. So that was their motivation for moving forward. I think there's another good example in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where Michigan State University has moved a portion of their medical school and the community is hoping to use that as a springboard to develop activity in medical devices and other research. Now the move by Michigan State in part was enhanced because there are a couple of families there, the Van Arsdale, who started the famous direct selling company whose name I can't remember right now, Amway. So the Amway family comes out of Grand Rapids, and they have a tradition of community philanthropy that helps support this. So I think there are many examples you can look toward. I think Will's emphasis is absolutely spot on.
Great.
I had the luxury of spending my day yesterday in Lincoln and visiting UNL and seeing the food processing center. And these gentlemen are going to be touring Innovation Campus later today, but I think there's an amazing opportunity to use that. And you're on the track with Innovation Campus, but I was extremely impressed with the what's being offered, what's being done at the Food Processing Center in terms of food science. And I think this area has an amazing opportunity to get on the map for being the food science capital of the world, just like the ICAR is in Clemson.
Great. And Michelle's already promised us projects, so that's what's super about that.
Jason, one last thing is that on successful programs of universities, economic development, private and government, the really top flight programs such as Purdue, #1, LSU as well, have the Research Foundation, the University Research Foundation, contributing significant dollars into economic development. And I tell you really got to look at Purdue. I mean, they're a very similar situation. They've attracted numerous businesses in high technology, and they do all the things right, tech transfer and so forth, but it's that research foundation that is critical in helping to fund those programs.
Thanks, Dennis. A couple of you have alluded to this already, and obviously, generally labor, whether it's cost or availability, is one of the most important aspects in the site selection process. And we are a community in a state with perpetually low unemployment. We also believe that we can show a significant amount of underemployment, and we use various ways to do that. But what are some creative ways that communities and states have been able to show an available and ready workforce in areas that maybe they have lower unemployment?
Well, let me first state that if you have to have a challenge in economic development, an economic development problem, that's a good one to have. Michelle called it a luxury a few minutes ago. I hadn't thought of it as a luxury, but in a way it is. I think it's important that you understand where that sort of evaluation comes into the process. We evaluate labor availability, cost, quality in different ways depending on where we are in the site search. We may be starting out with 50 or 75 communities, and that's essentially a statistical analysis. And some companies will look at 3.5% unemployment, 4% unemployment, and worry that they won't find enough people, and you'll be eliminated at that point. And there's nothing you can do about those numbers. You can't lobby them away. They are what they are. I think the hope for you then is in several ways. When we get down to a dozen or 15 semifinalist communities, that's when we're looking at your websites. That's when we're calling people like Pat Haverty and others. So I think your website is the first place where you can start providing information on labor availability that's not captured in the federal government's statistical mills. When you can talk about quality, there can be testimonials about hiring experience, information about training programs. Now, if you have particular industries that you're targeting, agriculture, for example, you may be able to identify specific companies that you'd like to attract, and then you can try to communicate those things to them directly. You also have to recognize that not all companies are looking for huge numbers of people. So if it's a call center, for example, that hopes to employ 1,000 people and pay average wages, they're more likely to be scared off by the 4% unemployment rate than an R&D facility that wants a small number of PhDs and wants to find good infrastructure to support that R&D. In manufacturing, you've all read about reshoring. The last 3.5 years, all I've done is manufacturing projects. Clearly, the way we compete in manufacturing in the United States is by shifting the emphasis in the production process from the quantity of workers to the quality of workers. So you want to emphasize the skills of the workforce, the trainability of the workforce, the training institutions. All of those things, I think, are part of the message you want to convey. And then last, we had comment at breakfast just a few moments ago that maybe the strategy for you is that you should emphasize that everybody in Nebraska would like to have 2 jobs. You're so hardworking that you can be the moonlighting capital of the world.
I suggested cloning, but that didn't go over well.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. So, any other comments? I know all of you work in this. What are some ways that you've seen communities have approached this?
So I think Jerry's spot on with if it's 1,000-person call center, I don't do a lot of call center working, but 500, 1,000 with 30% turnover rates, they're going to screen on unemployment rate. They're going to look at the growth of the labor market. They're going to look at those labor market dynamics, and it's going to be tough to survive that kind of a screen with extremely low unemployment, endemic low unemployment. So it does sort of come back to this whole concept of targeting. And I do, more high-tech manufacturing, 50 jobs, 100 million, more capital intensive with fewer jobs. And those, in my experience, working with those types of companies is they're less fearful of really these deep dives on the labor market because they understand that they're recruiting from a national labor pool, that they need those chemical operators, they need those highly experienced machine operators or technicians, and they, if it's life sciences or whatever industry, they understand that it's not just the local market that's supplying. And I think that's the point Jerry's trying to make in terms of, it sort of comes back. And the other thing I think is a lot of communities out there talk about how great their training programs are. I mean, how many states have the #1 training program in the country, Dennis? Like 10? 30. So,
and by the way, we do have the #1 training program in the United States. I just want to make that
we
clear.
all know roughly what the value is, and is it fee for service or is it a reimbursement program? How does it work? But I do think, looking at how you pitch and how you program your workforce development programs and how you fill in that food chain from training to screening to recruiting to making sure you're doing gap analyses and building the right curriculum at the training institution. I mean, that entire food chain has to be filled out, and there has to be dollars and a program behind it. Otherwise, people like, that are up here, we're used to seeing it, and we can sort of figure out whether it's just fluff. And so I think if you're in an area where the labor market's a big challenge, those are kind of 2 things to look for.
Michelle, thank you.
The other benefit that you all have in this area is having a university here and having a lot of really interesting programs and majors, and kind of getting back to some of that targeting of what you're a fit for. Those unemployment the unemployment numbers, that data from the federal side, does not include those graduates as they're coming out. So you have the opportunity to show we have this skilled labor pool in this particular sector, and every year is this kind of graduates coming out, and definitely more so than ever before. Especially for the manufacturing and these advanced industries, what's becoming more important is not just number of heads, but availability of certain types of skills and special skills. And so anything you can do to demonstrate that factor, in my experience, is becoming much more important than just the overall unemployment rate. Which those numbers are so out of whack these days anyways.
Dennis, you can't let this labor question go without answering, can you?
The unemployment rate of course is a concern, being low, but most companies are hiring really from either the underemployed or for direct skill sets. So when you locate a branch, back office, manufacturing plant, I'd say probably 60 to 65% will be qualified entry level, will have some relevant experience, and the companies will train to their technologies, and the others will be direct skills that are required, be it a machinist, be it a claims processor, or whatever. So it's really important to document in your market by occupation What are the skill sets? You need to be able to take job families and say for financial process transaction, manufacturing, R&D, help desk. Here are our direct skill sets, and here's how many we have in the metro area. Here's how many we have in our capture zone, which is a 30 to 45-minute commute. And then underemployment is really, really important. So it's pretty common knowledge. If you go through all 700 occupations reported by metro area and by county, you can pick out those that are underemployed blue collar, underemployed distribution, underemployed white collar, and say we've got these underemployed skills, and you can document that, and that's going to be a huge number. My best estimate is probably in Lincoln alone a minimum of 15,000 blue collar and a minimum of 30,000 white collar, bare minimum. I just did back in napkin stuff before I came out here. And then also it's very important to document the number of, again, you aggregate IT, business, and so forth. How many annual graduates do we have at UNL? How many annual graduates do we have UNL, UNO? Then in the capture zone with a 100-mile radius. And that is the labor pool. And then anything you can do to document the not immigration, the in-migration of talent, doing a survey, finding out who is moving into the area. Is it like Dallas, where you get people with skills that are moving into the area? You combine all that, and I think you'll have a pretty salient, compelling story to tell in Lincoln. And I don't believe for companies that are paying at the midpoint or above in wages, there'll be a shortage unless it's some arcane skill.
Great. Real quick, we had a presentation last night, and we talked to you a little bit, and I bring this up because a year ago we unveiled our new branding strategy. And you all took a look at some of the things we're trying to do to retain and attract young people. Any thoughts about that? And I know, Dennis, you talked about earlier kind of increasing our cool factor. Are we on the right track, you think, with that, or is that something?
Definitely on the right track. It's got a ways to go. I mean, I saw where Lincoln recently was voted, the #1 healthy city or something like that. So health, green, sustainability, once you appeal to new millennials, then you know you've made it. And the challenge that Lincoln has had, it's been a great place to recruit professionals with families, not as much in terms of young people graduating from college from around the country. And that's really important. And getting this downtown 24/7 will go a long way toward that, with a number of other factors to give a wow. And then you got to market. And here's where I do believe in some social media marketing for that as well. We can talk more about it, but Lincoln is on its way. It needs to be accelerated and more publicized. But you're getting there to be the cool factor. That's really key. Lincoln has got to be recognized as being cool. You'll get people to move here.
Lincoln is cool. So
MSN says we're surprisingly hip. So I'm not sure what that. We're going to take it though.
I think many communities are trying to compete to attract that next kind of knowledge worker, what they used to call the younger generation, getting them in. We're all getting older. I'm getting older. I think Jim's aging, but I'm not quite sure. He seems ageless to me. But I think you need to, as you move through this, I don't think anyone has a black box for it. So yeah, I think what I saw last night made a lot of sense for what you're doing. That's why I asked last night if this was and I know there's more to the strategy than what we saw. I think it does make a lot of sense. And one of the things I like to encourage communities is that, when you do start experiencing that success, is that you keep track of that success. And you made the point, Jason, last night that you're not credible trying to sell to this market. I'm not credible trying to, but the young people that move here, that you build that momentum around, that those relocatees, those folks that come here, that somehow you engage them and make them part of that program going forward. I think that will help you go a long way. And I see a lot of these programs around the country, and I often wonder to myself, really, how effective is this? How does it really work? And I don't, I think it's important to track it. I just don't know how you do that.
One of the reasons that I think you're seeing so much economic growth right now in the last year or so is because Lincoln has finally woken up. You probably should have had this strategy 10 years ago. It was long overdue, and so there was sort of a built-up pressure or momentum, and when you finally went this direction, it just makes so much sense that it popped. And so you have a unique situation right now where you're catching up rapidly to where a lot of other cities like Austin have been for a long period of time. So your challenge is to how to maintain that momentum once this initial sort of bloom fades and you become just another one of the cool cities out there, then you have a challenge of how to keep that momentum going. And I think Dennis is right about moving toward 24/7 city and increasing the coolness factor so that you can not only keep the graduates you have coming out of your fine institutions here, but also attract those from elsewhere, because you're going to have to do that ultimately.
Great. Any other comments, Michelle?
I shared this last night with the folks who were at the dinner, but I think that this campaign is excellent. I think there's a lot of energy in it, a lot of excitement, and that's what the millennials and the Gen Yers are looking for. And these people have those skill sets that a lot of current and future companies are looking for and needing. And so being able to not just tell people you're cool, but then show why, I think it is key to that, and kind of keeping the buzz going. And there's some really interesting social media campaigns happening with that, and I think you're completely on the right track, showing them what kind of opportunities are here. So first, being the cool city, that helps get them here. But then what can they do once they're here? What kind of jobs are available to them? What kind of opportunities are there? And what's that going to be like? So anything you can kind of show is important. I got to tour the Assurity Life offices yesterday, and wow, those are amazing. And just the kind of look and feel that I think these workers are looking for. And intuitively, they're going to think, I can do that in California. Not top of mind to think I can do that in Nebraska. So this campaign is really going to help change your image, and then delivering on that once they get here is the second part.
Well, as you know, we have the hardest working population in the United States, so we have 500 people chomping at the bit to get back to work. So we're going to wrap up. One quick question before Tom gives me the hook. Project activity increasing, decreasing, the same, moving forward? Dennis, why don't we start with you? We'll just go down the line.
Yeah, increasing across all sectors, including manufacturing. We're seeing a rebirth, not a rebound from the recession, but a rebirth in American manufacturing.
So, our projects, we don't see everything, but an increase in the planning for projects. Our projects really have long lead times. But increase in the planning for projects, I think there's a lot of pent-up capital to, companies have not spent money on reinvesting for facilities, so I'm optimistic.
Our office is in Silicon Valley in Southern California, and we see, particularly in Silicon Valley, a pent-up demand for engineers and life science professionals. Genentech has 435 unfilled positions right now, so you can't get the labor in Silicon Valley, so I think they're looking to reach out to other areas where they could potentially expand to. So you're in a good space right now.
I think project activity is increasing. The question still in my mind is whether the companies will commit to the project rather than just plan and think about it. I think that's still an open question.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we're all very busy with project work. It's the execution that is still kind of in limbo as companies are trying to figure out their capital expenditures and other costs that they're seeing on the horizon. So it's increasing, but maybe still a little slow on the execution.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's give Jason and our panel a round of applause for this excellent presentation. Thank you. Thank you so much.